Okay, we're going to take a look today on how Fidel Castro's foreign policy in the Cuban Revolution from 1959 to 1963, a betrayal of the promises of the revolution. Um, so before we understand Castro's foreign policies, we wanted to understand what his promises of the revolution was. So the whole intent of Castro's Cuban Revolution was to get rid of the old dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. Now, Batista's reign was based on a lot of corruption, violence, and cronyism. Batista's repressive government has systematically profited from the exploitation of Cuba's commercial interests by negotiating lucrative relationships with both the American mafia, controlled drug, gambling, and prostitution businesses in Havana. And Havana was one of the most profitable cities in Cuba. But because Havana was casino based, it was like a Latin version of Las Vegas. It was run by a lot of, under the law people. So that means most of Cuba's income came from um, the economy of casinos, of black markets, of drugs. Now, that also means that the money made in those situations do not all go directly to Cuba. And they had a large United States based multinational companies who were awarded lucrative contracts to um, to do business in Cuba. Of course, if you do business with a foreign nation, you expect to have a win-win situation here, right? Well, instead, American businesses and foreign businesses in Havana take away the money Havana was making because of contracts award foreign multinational companies with most of Cuba's economy because they were they were under the law. There was no law that governs the economy so that it goes back to Cuba. And Batista's regime was special because of extreme violence when there started to be revolts and little rebellions against Batista. He he established tighter censorship of the media and utilized his bureau for the repression of communist activities, secret police to carry out wide-scale violence, torture, and public executions, ultimately killing anywhere from hundreds to 20,000 people, um, because he did not want anyone to oppose his regime. And also, his regime was increasingly corrupt with cronyism. Um, as I said, in the 1950s, Havana was a hedonistic playground for the world's elite. They had produced sizable gambling, prostitution, and drug profits for the American mafia, corrupt law enforcement officials, and politically elected cronies. So those people who worked in Batista's regime and the government were not necessarily fit for the job as politicians, whereas they were more there because they paid the way to be there, or um, Batista just put them there, and all of them profited from the rest of Cuba. It's very corrupt. Now, Castro promised, after he succeeded in the revolution, that he promised sovereignty and free healthcare and universal literacy. Now, Fidel Castro was from not even a very rich or not very poor, but a typical middle class Jesuit Spanish family, and he promised the Cuban people that the revolution he led was intended to bring liberal, democratic, multi-party government, and an open economy with less foreign ownership. So that means the money doesn't go abroad, it stays in the country, and more economic equality to Cuba. to distribute the money equally between the classes, no more corrupt officials taking up Cuba's national income. Now, he states this in 1956 in a 5 law statement, and these are just 5 promises he gave to the Cuban people, and he promised that he would fulfill these as the leader of Cuba. Now, the first one was to restore democratic rights that existed before 1952. So before Batista's regime, everything was run democratically. Batista actually was elected through a democratic election. However, the way he ran the government, it was more of a one-man says all kind of thing. He didn't really allow a lot of public say people's opinions. The second promise in the 5 law statement Castro made was to make already great medical systems in Cuba free and universal to everyone, not just for the elite, for the poor, for the middle class, for those who can't afford anything. The third promise he made was to end legal race discrimination. The fourth promise he made was to restore land ownership rights to Cubans. Remember, most of the land owned they weren't owned by Cubans, they were owned by foreign investors. The money made on that land went to foreign investors rather than back to the Cuban people. The fifth promise was to invite foreign investments. Now, this isn't the same foreign investment that corrupted Cuba. Instead, it was foreign trade. There would be no crony contracts. There wouldn't be any corrupt distributions of money. Foreign trade is necessary because Cuba is a small island. It cannot be fully self-sufficient. Right. Now, about the last promise. During the Cold War and all that, Cuba had to choose a side between teaming up with the United States or the USSR. But after the Bay of Pigs and the United States being so aggressive to Cuba, Cuba chose to side with the Soviet Union, being a communist state. Well, there was no much difference in their economic views, just the fact that the A by name were communists, right? So after they decided to join the Soviet Union, the United States cut off all the trade. Cuba didn't like the United States already. That's why they joined with the Soviets. The United States had been exploiting them, and have been taking away a lot of their income. And even after Castro came in power, the United States still tried to convince him, to persuade him in the old ways, and all these corrupted contracts, and to restore Havana again to pretty much a United States owned city. So Castro chose to side with the Soviets. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall, well, the United States were pretty mad that there was a Soviet ally just 100 miles away from the shore, right? And after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, and the Soviets started to decline, the entire economy of Cuba dramatically dropped. It was going down already because of the little trade it had with the countries around it. The United States was this biggest opportunity for foreign trade and investment to get things they don't need, right? But because the United States had blocked off trade, they could only do Soviet allies. Well, now Soviets are declining, and Cuba needs money because it's starving. So Castro needed some form of foreign currency, and the only way to do that now, can't go being the Soviets, they can't help you with anything. So he had to open doors to tourism, and all those attendant problems came back again. The social economic disparities in prostitution, black market hustling, more corruption, just like Havana, but now all of Cuba. So also when Castro came to power, the first thing he did was to get rid of Batista's old regime, right? A complete wipeout of it, and started having trials and executions of enemies. And he was very notorious for the pardon of firing squads. And although at first it was for the purpose of getting rid of the old regime, it really reminded a lot of the public of the violence that Batista had in Castro's practices. Now, towards the years later, when um, economy was not getting better, people started to complain and revolt. The same violence appeared in Castro. And although Val, the free, the no violence was not a promise that Castro made, he did promise to restore democratic rights. That's one of his first promises, right? And the violence really imitated that of Batista's. It didn't really look like it was a fair, if it was a fair democratic country, then other parties would have the same say. But Castro was getting rid of the other parties, so it wasn't fully democratic. Second and third promises to make great medical systems free and universal and to end legal race discrimination was very difficult because of because Castro was so focused on trying to repair the economy and couldn't really deal with any domestic, cultural, or social economic change. Um, and making medical systems free and universal for all of Cuba can only happen if all of Cuba can eat first, right? So the fourth promise he made restored land ownership to rights of Cubans. Well, he didn't do that because he returned back to open tourism and all those problems came back in. And the fifth promised to invite a foreign investment. Well, he invited the wrong foreign investment again, just like in Batista's regime. All in all, these are how Castro's foreign policies from 1959 to 1963 betrayed his promises of the revolution.